Dear friend Michael, I am very grateful to you for extending this invitation and very moved to stand once again in this place, though with all of Riverside, my heart breaks that so many things separate us. This pandemic, of course, the pandemics that Dr. Burchett mentioned in her prayer. Still, it is a great honor and privilege, a movement of the Spirit, to be allowed to bring an interpretation of the word of our Lord today. Now, the story of Tamar is by no means a traditional reading for Advent 1. But we do have here a deep connection with the usual Advent theme in Mark's Gospel, where Jesus foretells disaster in the cosmos and on earth, such tribulation as has not been seen, he says, and also of the Son of Man descending on clouds of glory. Yet of that day and hour, Jesus warns, beware, keep alert, for you do not know when the time will come. Keep awake, for you do not know when the master of the house will come, in the evening, in the midday, in the midnight, at cockcrow, at dawn. And what I say to you, I say to all, keep awake. Strive to awaken. That's our theme. You may recall from my preaching with you years ago that it seems to me best to tell Bible stories not because they happen, but because they're happening and because they help. God knows our times are bringing such tribulation as has not been seen. And God knows we need help. So, what to make of Tamar and Judah's story? Commentaries all agree that this story is some kind of stranger. A recent one describes it as a break in the story, which comes from independent sources. An older one calls the chapter an interlude in Joseph's story. And something like anger is bubbling up in a trusted commentary from the 1950s. It goes like this. This story is like an alien element suddenly and arbitrarily thrust into a record which it served only to disturb. Certainly few people would choose this chapter as a basis for preaching. Well, for many months now, Riverside has been listening to the voices of women of the Bible. So let us join the few people who would choose Tamar's story for a Sunday morning sermon. And let's listen to learn not what happened, but to learn who we are and how we may be helped in the telling of her tale. Now, someone did stick this story into the middle of a long narrative a long time ago. Why? I think the simplest explanation is that it got in here by popular demand. Imagine that the very long Joseph narrative, one of the longest in the Bible, imagine that that very long saga had been written down and had been read in public enough for people to begin to wonder, where's Tamar? Put Tamar back in. It doesn't matter where. That story really matters to us. Well, who was this us? Around 700 BC, the people of Israel had come to a violent end. An empire to the east had destroyed their cities and scattered the 10 tribes to the winds. But one tribe was not involved in those wars. That land was called Judah. It was in Judah that King David built Jerusalem and Solomon his temple. To Judah, Isaiah and Jeremiah brought their thundering oracles. Only the people of Judah were left to tell the stories we call Old Testament. The word Judaism is really Judaism. It comes from Judah. So also the name Judea, which you're going to hear again on Christmas Eve a few weeks from now when someone reads, "A decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be enrolled, and Joseph went down from the city of Nazareth to Judea." Yes, the city of David called Bethlehem. The people who demanded the story of Tamar be put back in were Judahites. They were Judah's people. And they were making certain that the children would always know how they came to be who they are and how they are. So what was it in here that just has to be heard? Well, the obvious is that the future of God's promise hangs on Judah the man and Judah the land, or the people. Now, to make it into the future, Judah the man doesn't need to go to war or build up a lot of wealth. He doesn't need to dive deep into divine things as his dad did. He has only to raise children up who raise up yet more children. And this one job, the story says, at this one job Judah failed. Oh yes, he fathered 3 sons. But some carelessness about the future was sown like a bad seed into these sons who did not heed the call to life, and 2 of them died. Fearing for the 3rd son, Judah sent his only daughter Tamar back to her father-in-law's house to wait for Judah to give her in marriage to his remaining son at the right time. And so the young widow waited. The right time did not come. Judah's wife died. He mourned for her a while, but now he's getting on with his life. From now on, he will be willing to pay for the pleasure of go-nowhere sex. But Judah is done with the future. And all history is hanging from a cliff. Imagine telling your story of who we are and what we're like this. I mean, your story of Riverside, your story of America, you name it. Imagine telling your story like this. We have been careless about our future. We've paid the dead their due, but we do more for our own pleasure than for our own posterity. We don't focus. And now we're failing. How will we ever change our self-serving ways? Look, no nation, nowhere, no place, never did any nation inscribe its stories with self-criticism so severe as did Judah of old. The oracles of the great prophets of Judah, Jeremiah, Isaiah, we could name many. They prove my point perfectly well. But we forget how easily a later generation might have trashed the scrolls of the prophets, just as it has been all too easy for the fragile white people of this nation to trash the scrolls of slavery and massacre and mass incarceration to try to make America great again. But Judah has kept their scrolls, no matter how hard they were. Here, with the story of Judah and Tamar, they confess that it is in their character to care not at all for the future, but for themselves only. Only in sackcloth and ashes can we see the cracked foundation on which our house was built and on which it must be rebuilt. Is there help? Is there help? Well, not as we expect. Swaddled in widow's garments, shunned in her father's house, powerless for the future, Tamar awaits a fate at the hand of her father-in-law Judah. Will he rise to the destiny of the nation? Or must she forever face the stares of a town without pity? What would you do? No, there's a better question. What will you do? For though we know that, like Judah, we too have been self-serving and careless of the future, we are also like Tamar. This is a parable. Have you not sometime felt like her? Like her in a church meeting? Like her in a worship celebration? Like her in a voting booth, or crying in the streets that Black Lives Matter? Like her, have you not felt that old customs and unwritten rules bind you like widow's garments? Like her, have you not felt that your yearning for life for your church, life for your nation, life for your cracked and cooking planet, have you not felt that your yearning for this life goes suppressed in you, repressed in you, depressed in you, unexpressed in you, while someone with too much power and too little care for the future says, not here, not now, not over my dead body? Well, suddenly Tamar will not take it anymore. Not another day in service to good old ways that keep her from becoming great. You know, she reminds me of some men I've known in prison who've told how they wore that long sentence in the big house, like a widow's garment, hot and heavy, wore it until the day they got up and determined to become great. I have met many such men. Tamar stands for that intelligence in you by the very grace of God, which will not anymore shuffle about the church if the future is not in it. The shuffling, that is. Look, Tamar stands for that intelligence in you that will not anymore gripe about them because the future's not in them. She stands for that intelligence that will not anymore stand for demoralized democracy and the derangement of justice in the hands of go-nowhere men. The future is not in them. You know, before Tamar even leaves her father's house, she is already expecting. She is expecting something big, something beyond good and evil. Now, action that is bold is not for that reason good. I'm very grateful to Maria Popova of the Brain Pickings website for drawing a thought from Friedrich Nietzsche right into this drama. Popova writes that Nietzsche, quote, offers the only charm against the transfiguration of heroism into monstrosity. The one elixir he offers of moral might that both fuels the fight of good against evil and subsumes it. And now she quotes her one favorite sentence of Nietzsche. What is done out of love always takes place beyond good and evil. Tamar stands for that love. That love that can awaken in any of us to use what yearning still stirs in us, to run a risk beyond good and evil, right in the teeth of carelessness and resistance in order to take part in what must come. Judah and Tamar, we are them both. And now they meet on the road. Judah thinks she's a prostitute, and he wants her. Or he wants himself, we might say. He wants to feel vital, yet without vital consequence. He offers her a goat in exchange. In all the old stories of Genesis, the goat stands for the ordinary offering to God made to try to manage God, putting very little skin in the game, or a little skin in the game. Calf skin, goat skin. But Tamar, who stands for the future that must come, Tamar refuses that ordinary, easy sacrifice to match her own offering. She wants his skin in the game, his signet, his cord, his staff. The signet is his name, his identity. The cord is his self-defense, the closure over his self-disclosure. The staff is his authority, his power. Tamar requires him to let all this go into her keeping if he would have his way with her. In the story, only Tamar acts freely. Judah acts only from habits of fear and desire. Only Tamar intends the future of the people. Can't you hear the ancient voices crying out to the generations, to us? Strive to awaken. You need help from beyond yourselves to become yourselves. Your Judah nature, so conservative of tradition, your Judah nature will die when crisis comes, unless you let go your old identity, your authority, your cautious self-defensiveness to join with the vital energies sent you by grace to birth a future. Now each of them returns home by a different way. And Judah soon gets word that Tamar is pregnant. "Burn her," says he, all of a sudden inflamed with the conservative value of the law. You know, left to itself without love, the conservative cast of mind will always use violence to keep its world from changing. When their numbers get big, the people, any people who are Judah-minded, are ready to torch anything they don't understand. Judah stands for that quasi-religious certainty that the troubling voices of strangers and cultures and people of color and immigrants and Muslims and LGBTQ persons and disabled, we could go on and on, how all of them in the conservative cast of mind can be burned from its world. Alas, where there will be no future. But before she goes to the stake, Tamar offers Judah a chance to see himself. "Here are signet, cord, and staff," she writes. "By him whose these are am I with child. And by the grace of God, Judah sees." He sees that in the woman's love and courage, he has not been left for dead. He can be taken up in great things. And yet to get there, he has yet one more surrender to make. Will he make it? You see, Tamar's package has come to him privately. Therefore, if she is burned to death, he can retake his old identity, put back his self-defense, and take on his power. No one will know. Right. No one will know. All history of Judah, everything we call Judaism, all of Christianity, none of it will happen if he will not surrender his identity, his defensiveness, and his power. But if he lets go, he can come to life through the love Tamar has shown beyond good and evil. Remember how he chooses? "She is more righteous than I," says he. Inscribe that sentence on your heart. She is more righteous than I. This too is in the nature of Judah and in our nature. At the right time, oh God, help us to let stir in the loins of our conscience a desire undeterred like Tamar's for the future that must come. And stir in us also, oh God, a confession like Judah's, accepting help from beyond, to begin again in honesty and fruitfulness with love, regardless how heedless was our terrifying past. Whoever will walk these paths helps to inscribe a story so compelling that generations yet to come will tell it and tell it again. Choose Judah, choose church, choose America. Amen.